Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are attempting to chart a course through, well, a confluence of tragedy, deep history, and raw geopolitics.
We are. And it's all happening in a nation that the sources we're looking at describe as being in the midst of a decisive, nationwide existential reckoning.
We are, of course, talking about the crisis that is currently unfolding in Iran. Specifically, we're focusing on the massive protests that ignited across the country, starting back on December 28th, 2025.
And this really isn't a simple news story.
Hmm.
For this deep dive, we're looking at three core layers of source material, and they create this profound tension.
What are those layers?
On one hand, you have the chilling hard numbers of death and repression. These are coming from human rights groups who are operating under, just extreme duress.
Okay, so that's the data.
Right. Then you have the vast, millennia-long history of a civilization that seems to be striving to reclaim its own identity. And then finally, you've got this very complicated, high-stakes debate that's unfolding across the West, especially in Washington, over what, if anything, can or should be done right now.
So the mission for our deep dive today is, I think, essential. It's to find the truth that's trapped right now, as one source so eloquently put it, between bullets and bandwidth.
That's a powerful way to put it.
We need to cut through the noise to try and determine the true scale and a trajectory of this accelerated repression, and to understand the profound, truly existential nature of this revolt, not just for the Iranian people, but for the global community that's watching this potential geopolitical pivot point.
And that concept you mentioned, bandwidth, is really the central methodological challenge for this entire analysis.
A blackout.
The blackout. Since early January 2026, the regime has imposed what the sources call a near-total nationwide communications blackout.
And we need to be clear what that means. This isn't just, throttling the internet.
Not at all. This involves severing international fiber access, systematically blocking VPNs, throttling mobile phone networks, and actually criminalizing any form of independent reporting.
It's a curtain.
It functions as a massive intentional blackout curtain. And what that does is it allows the state to prosecute violence completely unseen. So reliable verification of figures, of events, is extraordinarily difficult.
Which means we have to interpret every single piece of data that comes out with immense methodological care.
Every single piece.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This feels like a huge explosion of discontent that's been simmering for a very long time.
It does.
While the regime, of course, likes to blame foreign agents, our sources paint a very clear picture of internal combustion. So what was the exact sequence of events? What specific factors lit the fuse for this specific uprising that began on December 28th, 2025?
It was absolutely a culmination, a perfect storm of social, political, and crucially economic failures.
Right.
The documents we're analyzing really emphasize that while past protests might have been triggered by a single incident, like the fuel price hikes back in 2019 or the tragic death of Mahsa Amini in 2022, this one was different.
How so?
This was driven by a generalized, accelerating structural collapse. It wasn't one thing. It was everything all at once.
Let's detail that economic collapse, because that seems to be the real pain point for the average Iranian family.
The documents describe it as nothing short of catastrophic. We are talking about a complete currency freefall.
So the real just became worthless.
Virtually worthless against the dollar in late 2025. And this was driven by a combination of things. You had sanctions pressure, of course, but also, and this is crucial, endemic, highly visible corruption that siphoned billions into the hands of a small clerical and security elite.
And people could see this happening.
They could see it every day. Hyperinflation meant that food, basic goods, were becoming unaffordable. The middle class was being completely hollowed out.
And the sources also highlight a really critical political conclusion that the people on the street reached: that reform is structurally impossible.
Yes, and this is perhaps the single most dangerous consensus for the regime. After decades of attempting internal political moderation, supporting so-called reformist candidates.
Who were then invariably vetoed by the Guardian Council or the Supreme Leader.
Exactly. The system was rigged against change. So the younger, educated population reached a definitive conclusion. Reform within this system is impossible.
All the avenues were closed.
Symptomatically closed off. The avenues for democratic change, or even for just meaningful economic course correction, they were all gone. And so they concluded that the only way out was the removal of the system itself.
And the response from the street really confirms the depth of that conviction.
Without a doubt. The speed and the geographical scope of this revolt were shocking, even to seasoned observers.
How widespread was it?
Within just a few days of the December 28th start date, The protests had spread to all 31 provinces and more than 180 cities. That includes every single major urban center in the country.
That scale is unprecedented, right? Even compared to 2019.
Completely. It wasn't a localized disturbance or some regional flare-up. This was a simultaneous national revolt. And it signaled a deep, fundamental break in the social contract.
The sources also point out that the organizational maturity of this movement is a significant development. It suggests that lessons were learned from those earlier, brutally suppressed cycles.
That's a fascinating analytical point, because despite the immediate imposition of communication constraints by the regime, the uprising showed remarkable simultaneous national coordination.
How is that possible in a blackout?
It suggests pre-planning. It suggests decentralized cell structures and perhaps the use of low-bandwidth encrypted communications before the full blackout actually hit.
So where earlier waves might have been sequential, sort of popping up one after another.
This one was synchronous. It happened everywhere at once.
Yeah.
And that forced the regime to disperse its security assets then across the entire country, instantly.
This national coordination, though, it resulted in a national tragedy. And this is where we run into that massive, confusing gap between the confirmed, verified figures and the unverified estimates that are coming from opposition networks.
And we have to be so careful here.
We must interpret these figures with caution and with real methodological rigor.
Absolutely. We talk about human rights data under these extreme conditions. We have to start with what the sources call the defensible floor.
The defensible floor, what does that mean?
These are conservative estimates, by design. But they possess credibility because they rely on verifiable methodologies, often risking the lives of the researchers who are on the ground collecting this data.
So who are the key players providing this defensible floor?
The U.S.-based human rights activist news agency, which is known as HRNA, is the most crucial reference point here.
Okay.
And HRNA stresses that their methodology is based on verifiable data points. So we're talking cross-referenced eyewitness testimony, hospital records that are smuggled out, confirmed death certificates, and most critically, verified names and biographical data for each victim.
So they're not just counting bodies, they're identifying people.
They're identifying people. It's painstaking work.
And what do these conservative numbers reveal as of January 13th, 2026?
As of that date, HRA confirmed a devastating toll of 1,847 protesters killed.
1,847.
And to put a human face on this, that grim total included 9 children. Victims who are often shot in the head or chest, which confirms a policy of lethal force, not crowd control.
And that's just protesters.
That's just protesters. The total death toll, even by HRN's conservative metric, actually exceeds 2,000 when you factor in 135 security personnel who also died, and 9 bystanders who were just caught in the crossfire.
And HRNA itself says this is a conservative count.
They stated explicitly. It's designed to exclude any unverified cases, which means the true number is absolutely certain to be higher.
We also see figures coming from the Norway-based Iran Human Rights, or IHR.
Yes, and IHR operates a slightly different verification process, which can sometimes take a bit longer. By January 13th, they had verified at least 648 deaths.
A lower number, but still substantial.
A lower number, but both organizations are sending the exact same signal. The violence is overwhelming the ability of the human rights community to process and verify the information in real time, especially under the blackout.
Okay. Now, let's turn to the other side of the data coin. The signals from inside the black box. These are the figures that opposition groups are citing, and they suggest a scale of carnage that, if it's true, represents an unparalleled state crime.
This is where the numbers become highly contentious and very sensitive. The highest figure that's cited comes from the UK-based opposition-aligned outlet, Iran International.
And what are they claiming?
They have claimed at least 12,000 killed nationwide. And they say this was largely concentrated during that critical surge of violence on January 8th and 9th.
12,000. That is a massive number.
It is. Their reports often describe the events of those 2 days as the largest massacre in modern Iranian history.
What could possibly substantiate a number that high, especially with the lack of third-party confirmation?
Well, Iran International claims to be citing internal sources with unprecedented access.
So leaks.
Leaks from very high levels. We're talking leaked documents from the Supreme National Security Council, insider testimony from the presidential office, reports from numerous IRGC members across various cities, and cooperation from medical personnel who have been documenting the influx of bodies.
So while the 12,000 figure is massive and, impossible to confirm right now,
the sources point out that the type of source they are claiming, these high-level leaks, is what generates the signal. It suggests something catastrophic was happening, even if the number itself is uncertain.
And there's another slightly different signal coming from academic reports.
Yes. Time magazine published reports based on discussions with expatriate academics who were compiling informal estimates. They placed protester deaths at up to 6,000 by January 10th.
To 6,000, still huge. And what's their methodology?
Crucially, this estimate was based on internal reports from specific hospitals in Tehran and other major cities. But, and this is a big but, it excludes the bodies that security forces were systematically routing directly to IRGC facilities, to secret morgues, or forensic centers to avoid official documentation.
Ah, so they're bypassing the official system.
It's a known regime tactic to hide the numbers. This process of removing bodies from the official count suggests that even the hospital-reported figures are inherently low.
What's particularly revealing about the sheer scale of all this is how the regime itself seems to be, well, quietly accommodating the reality of mass death, even while it's loudly blaming terrorists and foreign agents.
And this classic damage control. They're engaging in strategic leakage.
How does that work?
It's a subtle but really significant rhetorical shift compared to earlier cycles where they would deny virtually all civilian deaths. By allowing certain figures to leak out, they attempt to set an anchor point.
An anchor far below the opposition's claims.
Far below the 12,000, but still implicitly conceding massive repression. For example, Reuters reported on January 13th that an anonymous Iranian official privately acknowledged around 2,000 total deaths.
And notice the language there. Total deaths.
Exactly. The official was careful to lump civilians and security forces together to muddy the waters.
And another, separately cited by the New York Times, was even higher than that?
Correct. The New York Times cited a senior health ministry official who anonymously estimated around 3,000 total deaths. Again, lumping all fatalities together.
So the significance here isn't the precision of their internal estimates?
But the fact that the regime is tacitly conceding mass fatalities, that's a concession they almost entirely avoided during the 2022 protests. They simply cannot hide the sheer volume of the bodies this time. The leaks suggest an internal recognition that the scale of their own operation has become too large to completely deny.
So if we look at the consensus, how should you, our listener, the learner, contextualize these wildly different numbers?
Well, the consensus among major fact-checkers is clear. First, the 12,000 figure remains definitively unconfirmed. It must be treated with skepticism because of the high likelihood of opposition bias, especially in the fog of war created by the blackout.
But on the flip side,
the same fact-checkers are equally firm that the official regime figures, even the leaked ones, almost certainly downplay the true scale of civilian deaths.
so where does that leave us? What's the number to hold on to?
It leaves us with a range. Most independent media and human rights analyses converge around the HRANA figure of 1,800 to 2,000 protester deaths as the established defensible floor. That's the confirmed tragedy.
While acknowledging that the real number could be much higher.
Exactly. While acknowledging the strong signal suggesting the ultimate figure could be 2, maybe even 3 times higher.
The key takeaway, then, is that the violence is being measured in the thousands, not the dozens. And we have to track both the verified human rights data and these unverified, but very significant signals coming from inside the regime's black box.
That's the only way to get a sense of the full picture.
So the core conclusion from all the sources isn't just that the protests were deadly, it's that the regime's response represents a staggering acceleration of violence compared to any previous cycles.
A truly staggering acceleration.
Let's delve into the speed and the nature of this violence. What were the tactics being employed, and who were the instruments of this repression?
To really understand the acceleration, we have to contextualize that HRNA figure of 1,847 confirmed deaths.
Okay.
That tragic number was accumulated in just over 2 weeks, between late December and mid-January.
Just over 2 weeks. And how does that compare to, say, the Mahsa Amini protests?
Well, if you compare that to the entire 2022 Mahsa Amini protest cycle, where the total confirmed death toll was around 500 to 550 over several months.
This 2025-2026 figure is 4 times higher in a fraction of the time.
Exactly. The regime dispensed with any idea of gradual escalation. They went straight to overwhelming lethal force from the very start.
So when did that dynamic shift? When did it go from something that looked like crowd control to outright lethal suppression?
The documents we have pinpoint January 8th and 9th as the critical inflection point.
What happened on those 2 days?
Prior to that, while it was deadly, there was still some attempt at utilizing traditional riot measures. But on those 2 days, The security forces shifted their tactics entirely. They started using live ammunition indiscriminately. And specifically, automatic weapons were fired directly into unarmed crowds and into residential areas.
Analyzing the nature of that violence, it sounds far beyond any kind of traditional policing.
Oh, it's a completely different category. And that is the crucial distinction that's emphasized by both IHR and HRANA.
And what do they say?
They stress that the regime's tactics increasingly resemble organized shoot-to-kill operations,
Shoot to kill.
often targeting vital organs, the head, the chest, to ensure immediate lethality. The eyewitness accounts that were successfully smuggled out describe scenes closer to war than policing.
What kind of scenes?
Not just rubber bullets or tear gas. We're hearing about snipers positioned on rooftops, security forces deploying vehicles against crowds, bodies literally stacked outside morgues that lacked a capacity, and wounded protesters being systematically dragged from their hospital beds by plainclothes Basij forces.
And this generational dimension, the fact that the victims are largely under 30, what does that tell us about who the regime is targeting?
It tells us two very important things. First, the simple demographic reality is that the vast majority of Iran's population is young. They've only ever known the Islamic Republic. They have no memory of the 1979 revolution and feel absolutely no loyalty to its founding myths.
And the second thing?
The second is that the targeting of this youth demographic underscores that this is fundamentally a generational revolt against a gerontocracy. By killing the youth, the regime is attempting to eliminate its demographic opposition and really shatter the future of the civil resistance movement itself.
So when the violence reaches this scale, we need to be very clear about who is pulling the trigger. The focus immediately falls on the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Basij militia.
Right.
But we need to understand the distinction between these two groups because they play very different roles in this machinery of repression.
That distinction is absolutely key to understanding the sheer coverage and the depth of the violence. Both organizations are, in essence, repurposed instruments of internal war.
So let's start with the IRGC. Who are they?
The IRGC is the elite, professional, militarized force. They handle the heavy coordination, the intelligence, and the heavy firepower. They were originally established to defend the revolution from external threats, but now they are its primary internal enforcers.
And the Basij. How are they different?
The Basij militia is the ideological, neighborhood-based force. They are the shock troops of internal control. They're often comprised of less trained, but highly ideological volunteers.
So they're everywhere.
They're everywhere. They draw their strength from neighborhood mosques and ideological centers, which makes them pervasive. They are the eyes and ears on the ground, and they are the hands used for the dirty work, like the door-to-door raids.
Can you describe the operational deployment? How did these two groups coordinate during a crackdown like this?
The crackdown is characterized by advanced militarization. This is not riot control. This is urban combat.
So actual military units on the streets?
We have reports of specific IRGC operational units like the Nabi Akram Division being deployed into restive-occupied cities. Their operations are highly coordinated. The IRGC forces will often open fire first, using snipers and heavier automatic weapons to suppress organized resistance.
And then the Basij follow-up.
Then the Basij militias conduct the follow-up operations. That's the door-to-door arrests, the beatings, the forced disappearances, and the intimidating searches across residential areas. It's a two-pronged attack.
Now, the regime needed to create some kind of narrative to justify this overwhelming violence against its own citizens, particularly to those ideologically motivated Basij members. How did they achieve that rhetorical shift?
They initiated a very dramatic rhetorical maneuver. They began framing protesters not as disaffected citizens demanding change, but as terrorists, seditionists, and agents of foreign powers.
And that classification is vital for them.
It's everything, because it provides the necessary ideological and legal cover for what they term unlimited violence. By designating protesters as terrorists, the security forces are instructed that they are no longer dealing with civilians who are protected by even the Islamic Republic's own legal standards.
They're dealing with an enemy.
They're dealing with an existential enemy that must be destroyed. It completely changes the rules of engagement.
But no system of repression is perfect. Are there signs that this level of mass bloodletting is putting a strain on the security forces themselves?
The strain cuts deep, and the sources do report cracks appearing within the security apparatus, which are highly, highly significant.
What kind of cracks?
We have reports of arrests of officers who allegedly refused direct orders to fire on unarmed crowds. There are persistent rumors of desertions and even some active defections, particularly among the lower-ranking, more conscripted Basij members who are now facing the raw violence of their own government's actions against their neighbors and friends.
But that strain can cut both ways.
It can. And analysts warn that if this strain is not compounded by external pressure or further internal dissent, it can lead to a very dangerous outcome. Systematic slaughter, as the remaining hardened forces double down on their loyalty to the regime to protect themselves.
So if we're to connect this specific crisis to the broader political history of the Islamic Republic, we realize that the 2,000 death threshold wasn't crossed in December 2025.
No, it was crossed a long time ago.
And it's essential for you, the learner, to grasp this historical context as it shows a decades-long pattern of repression being the primary tool of governance for this regime.
Let's just review the grim historical breakdown. The 2019 Reborn protests, which were sparked by fuel hikes, resulted in approximately 1,500 people killed.
1,500.
Then the 2022 Masa Amini protests, which focused heavily on women's rights and the compulsory hijab, added another 500 to 550 confirmed deaths to that total. And this doesn't even account for the hundreds killed during the 2009 Green Movement, or earlier, often isolated, instances of unrest.
So when we add the current confirmed 1,847 protester deaths from this 2025-2026 uprising.
That brings the cumulative total well beyond 3,000 confirmed protester deaths from just the major protest cycles alone, and that's by the most conservative, verified counts.
And the true figure is likely much higher.
Far higher. But this number alone leads to an inescapable conclusion that the analysts have drawn. The Islamic Republic has crossed a profound qualitative line. It has moved definitively from repression to mass bloodletting, from attempting governance to waging siege warfare against its own people.
So this acceleration we're seeing now isn't an aberration.
It's the confirmation. The regime is confirming its commitment to violence as its final, non-negotiable principle of rule.
Which means the history shows this isn't some temporary escalation, but the defining feature of the regime's relationship with its own society.
Precisely. The social contract isn't just broken, it has been systematically replaced with an explicit state of internal conflict, where the state views large segments of its own population as an enduring existential threat that must be physically eliminated or permanently subdued.
When we analyze violence this extreme, the question naturally arises. What is the regime truly trying to extinguish? Why must the response be so visceral, so total?
It's a fundamental question.
And our sources suggest the answer lies in Iran's multi-millennial identity. This shift takes us from the immediate bloodshed to the vast historical context that is really essential for that aha moment for you, the learner. The concept that Iran is not merely a country in crisis, but a civilization compressed into a nation-state.
This deep time perspective is absolutely vital to understanding what's at stake. The current political borders of Iran contain a history that stretches back to the 5th millennium BCE.
So long before the concepts of modern nation-states or even the current ideological divisions existed.
Exactly. This was a place of early urban settlements, of agricultural innovation, of complex social organization that literally shaped the ancient world.
Let's elaborate on that historical grandeur because it's important. We have to go back to the cradle of empire to Cyrus the Great.
You have to. Think about the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great, who reigned from 559 to 530 BCE. This was, at the time, the largest empire the world had ever seen. It spanned vast distances.
But its lasting genius wasn't just its size, was it?
No, it was its revolutionary model of governance. Cyrus pioneered a model that was grounded in religious tolerance, legal pluralism, and an incredible administrative sophistication.
So what did that tolerance actually look like in practice? It sounds very modern.
It was revolutionary for its time. The sources emphasize the Cyrus Cylinder, which is often cited as an early charter of human rights. It codified respect for local customs and religions.
So conquered peoples were not erased.
They were incorporated and respected. Their institutions were maintained. The famous example is the Jewish exiles returning to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. This model stood in sharp contrast to, say, the Assyrian model of forced deportation and cultural destruction.
And this legacy of pluralism, of valuing the diversity within an empire, that's the deep history that the current regime's demand for uniformity is trying to suppress.
Precisely. And this wasn't just a temporary flash of glory either. This civilizational legacy persisted through successive empires.
Like the Sasanians.
Indeed. The Parthian and then the immensely powerful Sasanian Empire, which ruled from 224 to 651 CE, they ruled much of Eurasia for nearly a millennium. They acted as a true civilizational bridge between the classical West Roman Byzantium and the rising east of India and China.
And they were innovators.
Their engineers mastered monumental architecture, complex irrigation systems. Their administration developed a form of statecraft that influenced everything from court protocols to financial management across the entire region.
So why is this deep history so critical to the current political situation? It's not just ancient history. It defines the cultural potential and the memory that is being strangled today.
It defines what's possible, because Iran was a producer of civilization. It generated knowledge and culture. It didn't just receive it.
What are some examples of that?
Look at Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian religion. It introduced the profound concept of ethical dualism, this cosmic struggle between Asha, truth and order, and Druj, falsehood and chaos, long before similar ideas defined the moral and legal codes of the West.
And visually, you can see it in the architecture.
You can. Architectural marvels like Precipice were, in effect, an architectural manifesto of order, harmony, and centralized, sophisticated statecraft.
And then the arrival of Islam didn't erase this foundational Persian identity. It was built upon it. And that fusion led to the Islamic Golden Age.
The documents are very specific on this point. Islam did not replace Iran. It was layered onto it.
And the sources of the Islamic Golden Age are often Persian.
They are. Thinkers, scholars, administrators, poets, names like Avicenna or Ibn Sina in medicine and philosophy, and Al-Khwarizmi in mathematics, whose work gave us both algebra and algorithms. They became the backbone of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Islamic Golden Age.
So these scientific and philosophical achievements flourished because the new faith was...
It was elevated and administered by this deep, pre-existing Persian civilizational capital.
So the Iranian identity is fundamentally tied to intellectual curiosity, to tolerance, and to administrative excellence.
It is. The sources show that for millennia, Iranian civilization has valued knowledge, rational inquiry, and pluralism. The idea of a state based on a narrow, dogmatic, enforced belief is fundamentally alien to the deep wellspring of Persian history, which embraced synthesis, knowledge, and tolerance.
This makes the current reality of the Islamic Republic a profoundly painful contrast. You have this millennia-old legacy of intellectualism and pluralism confronting a narrow ideological elite.
It's a complete inversion of its history. The Islamic Republic, established in 1979, is defined by a system that deliberately fuses clerical absolutism with coercive state power. It is a harsh, theocratic authoritarianism.
So it's designed to be the opposite of that a commended model of tolerance.
The complete opposite. This regime aggressively polices belief, it punishes dissent, and it criminalizes basic freedoms. It views society not as a resource to be cultivated, but as an unruly entity that must be perpetually controlled.
And the human rights abuses are described as systemic, a built-in feature of the system, not a bug.
They are structural. They are essential for the regime's survival. We see institutionalized repression at every single level, arbitrary detentions, unfair trials often leading to forced confessions, the institutionalized repression of women and girls through laws like the compulsory hijab and the morality police,
and severe discrimination against ethnic and religious minorities,
as well as the complete forced invisibility of LGBTI individuals. It is an entire apparatus constructed to enforce ideological conformity.
And fear is the ultimate tool to maintain this conformity.
It is the regime's final currency. The accelerated use of the death penalty is the starkest indicator of this. The sources report at least 1,500 executions in 2025 alone.
1,500.
To put that in perspective, this places Iran among the highest per capita execution rates globally. And they often use public executions and executions for non-capital crimes, like drug offenses or political dissent, to maximize that fear.
So the regime relies on fear
as its final currency because, for the vast majority of the young, educated population, those people under 30, the ideological belief no longer governs their lives. Only fear remains.
So beyond the moral tragedy of the repression, there's this immense strategic tragedy. A nation blessed with every structural advantage imaginable, held back by ideological rigidity.
It's a profound strategic loss for the world. Iran's geographical position is its greatest structural advantage. It sits literally at the crossroads of Eurasia, linking Central Asia, the Middle East, South Asia, and Europe.
Which should make it a natural hub for everything.
A natural hub for trade, for energy, for communication. It should be the economic engine for the entire region.
And structurally, it has all the other prerequisites for a global powerhouse.
It does. Immense reserves of oil, gas, and critical minerals are the foundation. Crucially, it has a large population, over 93 million people as of 2026, that is young, highly educated, and globally connected.
So by every structural measure, size, resources, human capital, geography.
Iran should be a G20-level economy. It should be a stabilizing global actor, capable of driving regional prosperity.
But it is definitively not that. Why does this potential remain perpetually strangled?
Because the regime has deliberately chosen isolation. The sources cite three key constraints: continuous proxy conflicts across the region, an ideological rigidity rooted in a permanent confrontation with the West, and pervasive economic mismanagement.
And that mismanagement is driven by these massive, opaque financial conglomerates, the boneyards.
Exactly, which are often controlled directly by the IRGC.
So the economic entanglement of the IRGC is crucial here. Why does that make normalization structurally impossible for them?
Because the IRGC's economic chokehold means they profit directly from the status quo of confrontation and isolation. They thrive under sanctions. They use smuggling, black markets, and their control over key national industries to enrich themselves.
So normalization would be a threat to them.
A huge threat. The document suggests that normalization could unleash a transformation comparable to Vietnam's post-conflict rise. Huge foreign investment, rapid economic growth, integration into global markets. But because the Islamic Republic is built on permanent confrontation and the IRGC's economic survival depends on isolation, the current leadership is structurally unable to pivot toward normalcy, even if it meant rescuing a national economy.
They need the external enemy to justify the internal siege.
That's it, exactly. The regime invokes external enemies to enforce internal unity and justify its extraordinary security apparatus. But as this 2025-2026 uprising proves, the cost of that isolation has completely and irrevocably broken the social contract with the people.
The sheer scale of the bloodletting that we talked about in Part 2 and the high strategic potential we've just detailed in Part 3 have forced an intense debate in global capitals about intervention.
It has.
So we're now looking outward, focusing on the policy response, specifically from Washington, and this high-stakes debate over intervention. The Trump administration has been criticized for, well, hesitating at a critical moment.
The critique leveled against Washington is very specific. They were, and I'm quoting an analyst here, 3 days behind the curve in their strategic response.
And this delay wasn't about a lack of information.
No, it was about a failure to translate a numerical trigger into a decisive policy shift.
And that trigger, according to the analysts, was the 500 death threshold.
Precisely. Analysts argue that when confirmed protester deaths cross 500, which happened around January 11, 2026, according to that HRN account, that historically signals that the regime has moved decisively from crowd control to mass repression.
And at that point, critics argue the U.S. response should have shifted.
It should have shifted immediately from just verbal condemnation to decisive targeted action.
What exactly has the Trump administration's public stance been?
President Trump has been intensely vocal. He issued statements urging the Iranian people to take over your institutions and promised that help is on its way.
And there was some tangible action.
There was. New, sweeping secondary tariffs were imposed on countries that were still trading with Iran, which increased the global isolation.
But the core criticism centers on the hesitation regarding direct action or intervention, correct?
Yes. While the administration signaled very strong options, which is a clear allusion to military options, the president also emphasized diplomacy, citing alleged private overtures from Tehran seeking de-escalation.
And the consensus among strategic analysts is that this delay has a severe consequence.
A very severe one. Time favors the regime. Every single day of inaction allows the regime to exploit the blackout, to consolidate its control, to systematically arrest organizers and intellectual leaders, to intimidate families, and to normalize the violence within that media vacuum.
So if the organizers are arrested and the communication channels remain severed, the revolution effectively loses its head.
It loses its ability to coordinate. Those internal fracture points we discussed in Part 2, the potential for defections within the security forces, can only be accelerated by external pressure. If that pressure doesn't come, the remaining loyal security forces feel emboldened, and the population begins to fear that their sacrifices were in vain. And that can lead to a potentially permanent suppression.
So the policy debate then centers on an intervention that is robust but highly constrained. The sources are definitive about this. This is not about a full-scale invasion. This is not Iraq 2003.
Not even close.
What exactly does this surgical strategy entail?
The definition is crucial here. The stated goal is regime paralysis.
Paralysis, not destruction.
A strategy designed to cripple the state's ability to coordinate and execute violence against its own citizens, not outright regime change by external military force. It is defined by precision and a very limited scope.
So what are the specific proposals for surgical targets that would achieve this paralysis?
They are focused entirely on the infrastructure of domestic repression. Proposed surgical targets include key IRGC command and control centers in Tehran and other major cities, their regional urban deployment bases that are used by the Basij,
Key communications nodes that enable the blackout and surveillance?
and elite leadership compounds. The intent is to degrade the IRGC and the Basij, the instruments of terror, to the point where they can no longer systematically open fire on crowds across 180 cities simultaneously.
But kinetic strikes, dropping bombs, carry enormous risks. What about non-kinetic alternatives like cyber warfare?
Cyber operations are seen as a critical non-kinetic tool. The goal would be to disrupt IRGC logistics, their surveillance systems, and their internal communication networks without any kinetic escalation,
So, for instance, scrambling their domestic surveillance feeds.
or interfering with the operational capacity of their urban deployment networks. You paralyze them digitally.
Proponents of intervention argue for urgency, suggesting there's a unique window of opportunity right now. What underpins this assessment of vulnerability?
The sources cite two main factors. First, the IRGC is already stretched incredibly thin across the entire country, trying to manage all these concurrent revolts.
Right.
And second, the IRGC has already been degraded by prior successful U.S. and Israeli strikes against their missile, drone, and nuclear infrastructure over the last few years.
So analysts argue this suggests a moment of unusual vulnerability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A moment where a targeted kinetic or non-kinetic strike could have a disproportionately large effect on their morale and their operational capacity.
Targeted strikes, however precise they are far from risk-free. What are the counterarguments and the potential consequences that policy analysts are weighing, particularly in terms of regional blowback?
The risks are significant, and they have to be taken seriously. They include the potential for immediate and sophisticated cyber attacks launched by Tehran against Western infrastructure,
And proxy retaliation.
rapid proxy retaliation by Iranian-backed groups, Hezbollah, the Houthis against U.S. regional assets or allies, and the possibility of limited regional escalation in the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf.
And then there's the domestic risk within Iran itself, the potential for the regime to turn a foreign intervention into a tool of nationalism.
And this is perhaps the single greatest risk of kinetic action. If the action is poorly timed or badly executed or perceived as an attempted invasion, it could allow the regime to instantly cloak itself in nationalism.
Right. They could pivot the entire internal narrative.
They could change it from, this is a legitimate demand for change, to, we are under attack by a foreign enemy. And that would potentially unite otherwise disaffected elements of the population against the protesters, which would undermine the very internal revolt they were meant to assist.
So limited strikes might not even be effective at the street level where the Basij are operating. That's the analytic caution here.
That is the fear, that decapitating the IRGC leadership wouldn't stop an ideological Basij volunteer from conducting a door-to-door arrest operation.
But there's a powerful counterargument.
There is. The advocates for action argue that once repression passes a certain threshold, and 2,000 confirmed deaths is absolutely that threshold, then neutrality becomes complicity. Inaction becomes a strategic choice with severe consequences for the internal resistance, allowing the regime to crush the revolt in silence.
What other complementary non-kinetic measures are being intensely debated right now, particularly ones that could break that communications blackout?
The provision of satellite internet access, specifically Starlink, is perhaps the most discussed non-kinetic tool.
Right, getting information in and out.
If successfully deployed, it could break the blackout, restore global visibility to the violence, and allow organizers to coordinate again. But the technical challenge is immense. It requires either highly mobile, smuggled ground terminals or sophisticated air delivery mechanisms, and the regime is actively using jamming technologies to counter it.
So what else is on the table?
Other complementary measures include massive expansions of sanctions against IRGC economic entities, the diplomatic isolation of Iranian embassies, and direct financial and logistical support for civil resistance networks to keep them operational.
But these tools are slow.
They are essential, but they may not be fast enough to stop the bullets that are already in flight.
This entire deep dive, from the civilizational history to the crisis today, seems to confirm that Iran's ultimate salvation lies in its internal strength and its immense human capital.
It has to.
And the sources identify one of Iran's greatest unrealized assets, the diaspora.
The diaspora represents an immense technologically and intellectually capable future leadership class just waiting outside the gates. Sure. The sheer scale is notable. You have between 4 and 5 million Iranians living outside the country. That's a significant portion of the population, and it includes 1.6 million documented asylum seekers.
And this population is not, a group of uneducated refugees. They are highly skilled and embedded in the world's most advanced systems.
Far from it. This diaspora represents an enormous reservoir of technical and professional expertise. They are scientists, engineers, physicians, entrepreneurs, artists, financiers, policy thinkers.
Many holding senior positions in the world's most advanced institutions.
From Silicon Valley to major European universities. And the sources conclude that Iran's future leadership class, its administrative and intellectual elite, already exists. It is just outside its borders, waiting for the political space to return.
So what specific role can this diaspora play in a successful transition to ensure it doesn't devolve into the chaos we saw in other Middle Eastern revolutions?
They play 3 critical roles, now and potentially tomorrow. First, right now they are mobilizing global protests, advocacy networks, and independent media platforms like Iran International to keep the international spotlight on the violence.
And for the future?
They are developing transition blueprints. And the crucial element here is that Iran has immense structural advantages over countries that previously collapsed into chaos, like Libya or Syria.
What are those advantages?
Iran possesses a highly educated population, a deep bureaucratic memory, and a strong, unifying national identity. That civilizational identity we discussed back in Part 3.
So the diaspora's role is to be a bridge, leveraging this memory.
Exactly. Their role, as articulated in the documents, is not to return as foreign-imposed rulers, but to be the bridges between Iran's glorious, tolerant past and its democratic future. They can provide the necessary institutional memory and expertise to quickly rebuild a functioning state apparatus, ensure the transition moves toward democracy with minimum violence, and prevent the fragmentation that has plagued other revolutions.
They offer the competence needed to quickly activate Iran's enormous strangled strategic potential.
They are the key to unlocking it.
So after all of this, what does it all mean? The situation inside Iran remains intensely fluid, intensely volatile. Every statistic we have shared is provisional, given the blackout conditions. But the stakes for the region, for the global economy, and for the Iranian people are definitive.
They are. And the inescapable conclusion from all the sources we've looked at is that whether the final death toll of this current uprising stabilizes around the confirmed 2,000 protester deaths or surges closer to that unverified 12,000 number, the Islamic Republic has crossed a qualitative line.
It's a point of no return.
It has moved beyond political repression and into mass bloodletting against its own people. It has confirmed its ideological commitment to violence above all else. And the international community is currently locked in this desperate debate over whether the promised help, be it surgical, cyber, or diplomatic, will arrive before the silence of the blackout becomes permanent.
The path forward, if Iran is to realize the potential of its own civilization, is clearly defined in the analysis. Democracy over dogma, normalcy over isolation, dignity over fear. The Iranian people have demonstrated with their lives that they are willing to pay the ultimate price for this change, having utterly rejected the regime's legitimacy.
And we've spent this deep dive observing how Iran's current crisis is defined by a narrow ideological elite, suffocating a multi-millennial civilization. A civilization, remember, that pioneered religious tolerance and administrative sophistication long before the modern era.
So the ultimate question for the Iranian people, therefore, isn't about inventing a new national identity or creating something entirely novel.
No. The question is whether they will be allowed to finally become themselves again, aligned with their true civilizational strengths, the principles of pluralism and inquiry, and the strategic realities of the modern world, or if the current tyranny will extinguish that memory for good.